In the wake of the Becky Lynch injury and the big shakeup on the women's side with the big women's main event at Survivor Series, it bled over into Smackdown here this week. And there was another major shakeup that I have no doubt was a direct result of what happened with Becky and that whole situation. I don't for a second think that this was part of the original plan, but they panicked and they said, well, we've got to change things up a little bit and get people excited for this pay-per-view now that the biggest match on the show is no more. And Charlotte and Ronda is still a big match. I would argue not quite as big as what, Becky and Ronda would have been. But they felt they had to do something. And so what they did here on SmackDown was they changed the WWE Championship. After over 1 full year as champion, it was this very month. It might even have been this very week. 12 months ago on television. I want to say they were over in the UK, I think. AJ Styles beat Jinder Mahal to become WWE Champion. AJ Styles has been the champion ever since. And he came to SmackDown tonight and opened the show and was confronted by Paul Heyman, who made a very brief cameo. And Paul Heyman name-dropped Daniel Bryan, which was kind of weird that he would even bring up Daniel Bryan in the first place. It felt very forced, like it came out of nowhere. And Daniel Bryan did come out. After hearing his name mentioned a whole bunch of times, he didn't seem very happy at all. He confronted AJ Styles and said, look, you did beat me. You did beat me on television a few weeks ago. In fact, you tapped me out, just like you said, fair and square, and we hugged it out and everything, and I thought everything was cool, but don't mention my name again. This was all very forced, but again, this was last-minute panic planning here, and so this was what they came up with. They had to force some kind of issue between the two of them, even though everything seemed to be cool between them. And as he went to leave, AJ Styles did mention his name again, and so Daniel punched him in the face, and they brawled. And then in the next segment, we saw them backstage. Shane McMahon had to pull them apart. And out of nowhere, Shane says, you want each other? Fine, it's on the line. And just like that, we had a WWE Championship match 5 days before Survivor Series. Of course, it makes no sense. Why Shane, who's so concerned about Team SmackDown beating Team Raw, and you have Daniel Bryan here, who's co-captain of the SmackDown team, being put in this situation. But this is what they came up with, and that led to a main event of Daniel Bryan challenging AJ Styles for the WWE Championship. Now, I had seen the rumors online and all that, but the moment I knew they were doing this title change is when Paige, in a backstage segment, acknowledged that Daniel Bryan was out of the men's elimination match, and that The Miz now, instead of being co-captain, would be the sole captain. And I thought to myself, well, that's kind of odd. I mean, I guess they would explain it by saying, since Daniel might win the championship, we can't take the risk and we have to take him out of it. It didn't make sense. It didn't make sense to just pull him from the match. And so I figured they're not going to leave him off the pay-per-view. Obviously, he's winning the championship. And they had this big main event, last half hour of the show, with entrances and a gazillion commercial breaks, it felt like. And the match was fine. They had a good match. Dead crowd, for the most part. Kind of shocking, to be honest with you, to see how quiet and tame the crowd was until the final minutes of that match. And Daniel Bryan, it was very striking on this show. It's not like this necessarily in every city, so maybe it just was, where they were tonight. He didn't really seem to get all that great of a reaction. Even the yes chants and everything seemed very weak. It just didn't seem to be the same kind of energy that he used to get when he would come out. So that, to me, was very noticeable. But they went out and they had a very good match. And it built to a finish where AJ went for the phenomenal forearm. Daniel Bryan, if I remember, he either pulled the referee in the way or he ducked. I think he may have pulled the ref in the way. AJ collided with the ref. He didn't knock him out completely, but he collided with the ref. And with the ref's attention diverted, when AJ turned around, Daniel Bryan gave him a nice, swift kick to the balls. This poor fucking guy. AJ Styles got kicked in the nuts, I don't even know how many times, by Shinsuke Nakamura. And you got to think in this guy's head, he was at least moving past that. And now he's got to deal with this all over again. Here's another guy who kicks AJ in the crotch. So a low blow by the babyface Daniel Bryan, who gets booed. And as AJ stumbles back to his feet, Daniel Bryan hits the flying knee, and he gets the pin. And Daniel Bryan, 5 days before Survivor Series, 5 days before the big match, the big rematch between Brock Lesnar and AJ Styles, a rematch of what I thought was probably match of the year in WWE in 2017. Although I was far more excited about that first confrontation than I was the second one, especially since I was pretty sure that AJ was going to lose again. And maybe that's why they did what they did. Maybe they wanted to spare AJ the loss here because he was going to lose. I don't know, but they changed the championship, which just seemed like a real desperate move. But I'll say this much. I like it. I like what they did here. I like the heel turn. I like taking the championship off of AJ. I know some people are probably not too happy about that. And the way it happened on a random episode of Smackdown, it wasn't promoted. Look, they felt like their backs were up against the wall and they had to do something here. I don't know that that's what I would have done. But I'll say this much. It's a big move. It's already got a lot of people talking. And as I said before, the reaction that Bryan got when he came out wasn't really all that impressive. To be honest with you, ever since Daniel Bryan came back, he's been very flat. And I'm not exactly sure why that is, because even when he was the GM of SmackDown, he would come out and get some great reactions. He was still this beloved figure. It's not like, it's been 3-4 years and, the fans aren't as into him as they used to be. I'm sure on some level that's true. But he was still getting pretty good reactions when he was the GM. Then he came back, and it just feels like something's been missing. A heel turn might just be what the doctor ordered here. A lot of people don't really remember the old days of, heel Daniel Bryan, American Dragon, going back to the Ring of Honor days. He could be a heel. He's a great babyface. But he's been a babyface for so long, it kind of feels like they've done almost all they can do with him. The one thing I am a little upset about is everything was set for The Miz at some point to win the championship and Bryan to be the one to beat him for the title. But you know what? We got so much lately, even through Super Showdown, of Bryan and Miz. I think it was so much that it kind of killed whatever allure I had anyway for seeing them again at WrestleMania. Not to say that they couldn't have come back to it and built it up like a WrestleMania-worthy match. I do think it lost something because we saw them fighting so many times. So it kind of sucks that we're not going to get that conclusion to their story. But I don't mind this at all. I actually am kind of intrigued and interested to see where they go with it. But the bigger story now is that we're not getting AJ Styles one-on-one with Brock Lesnar Sunday at Survivor Series. The match now is Daniel Bryan. He's the WWE Champion. He'll be going one-on-one with the Universal Champion Brock Lesnar this Sunday. Non-title, of course. But all of a sudden, the main event has changed. And that's important because originally, the two big matches for me on this show were Becky Lynch and Ronda Rousey. And below that, I would have put AJ and Brock. I would not have ranked that ahead of the women's match. But those were the two matches that if you said, what are the two that you're looking forward to? It would have been those two. And now those matches are done. Those matches are no more. They've both been flipped. Now it's Charlotte and Rousey. And now all of a sudden it's Daniel Bryan and Brock Lesnar. Couple of things on that. First of all, AJ Styles is a man with no match. They could slot him in. Although I guess they would have already replaced him on the men's team. Actually, now that I think about it, I probably left the room when they settled that whole thing on the men's Survivor Series team. So I have to go back and check what the status of that is. I kind of walked out of the room before the end of the Miz Rey Mysterio match. I was going to go back later and watch it. So I don't know offhand if there's a spot still open in the men's match. If there is, I guess they could just slot AJ in there. I don't see that, though. I think the more likely scenario is one of two things. Number one, they could turn it into a triple threat. So AJ shows up at Survivor Series. He wants to be part of the match, even though it isn't a championship match. And they turn it into a triple threat. And you know what? That could be a hell of a match. Think back to that triple threat Brock Lesnar had at the Royal Rumble a few years ago. It was him and Cena and Seth Rollins. That was one of the greatest matches we saw in this company all year. Now, Brock laid on the outside for most of it and let the real workhorses do the work. Could be the same thing here. Brock could get taken out somehow. Not sure how they would do that, but Brock could get taken out. AJ and Bryan can work the majority of the match. Brock comes in. Of course, Brock wins. So they could go down that road. The other thing they could do is just do straight up one-on-one Daniel Bryan against Brock Lesnar and have AJ Styles run out and factor into the finish and cost Daniel Bryan the match. I do not see Brock Lesnar losing at SummerSlam or Survivor Series. I didn't think there was much of a chance of that happening even before. Now I think there's even less of a chance of that happening. So whether it's one-on-one and AJ interferes or it turns into a triple threat, I think Brock wins. But I think one of those two scenarios are more likely, and then going forward, I'm sure they'll play the feud out between AJ and Bryan. AJ's going to get his rematch at some point, so this issue between them isn't over. So a very interesting turn of events. But the other thing is, we now have Daniel Bryan against Brock Lesnar. Now, this is a match, if you've been listening to this podcast for any length of time, if you go back to 2013, 2014, there was a period of time where I was just the biggest advocate for wanting to see that match. I used to write columns for some websites, I did a whole column on it at one point. The WrestleMania 30 main event. This was months and months before the show. The WrestleMania 30 main event should be Daniel Bryan against Brock Lesnar, the David versus Goliath story. I know some people can't take it seriously because Bryan's so much smaller, but he was such a great underdog babyface that it could have made for a great story with him winning in the end. And it never happened. Then he got injured. Then he had to retire. And it looked like the match was never going to happen. Even when he came back earlier this year, I said, we're not going to get the match. Because if the goal is to protect Bryan from himself and to protect him from getting concussed again, the last person I would want to see him in the ring with is Brock Lesnar. You see what Brock did to those fucking Singh brothers on Raw Monday night? Whichever Singh brother it was, the first one that he gave the release German suplex to, how that guy is walking and not a paraplegic in a wheelchair, I'll never know. So you would hope that, he goes a little easy on Bryan. I don't know that Brock Lesnar knows the definition of going easy. I'm not sure Bryan would want him to anyway. So I am I'm very concerned about Daniel Bryan and what may happen on Sunday. This could end up being his final match. What a way to go out if it is. But it's a match I never thought we would see. But at one point, I thought that the David versus Goliath story between these two, they could have such a great match together. And after I saw the match that Brock had with AJ last year, I believed that even more. Well, here we are in 2018. We're about to get it. What's weird is that Bryan is a heel. So you can't really do the David versus Goliath story here because it only really works if you have the hero against the villain. Here it's the villain against the villain, which is why I think there's a pretty good chance AJ is going to end up being part of this match. He'll be the solid, hero that people can get behind. And I think that would be also a great match. So we'll see what happens. Things obviously are changing here on a day-to-day basis. So this could end up being a last-minute change on Sunday. It turns into a three-way. We'll see. But I'm bullish on what we saw here at the end of the show tonight. I'm not against it. I'm not against them turning Bryan because it seemed like interest maybe was waning. Frankly, he just wasn't very interesting. And I say that as a fan of his. He was pretty freaking dull, to be perfectly honest with you. And after what happened with this whole crown jewel thing where he wouldn't travel to Saudi Arabia and they kind of blew it off on television, had him tap out to AJ, it sure didn't seem like they had any plans for him. I figured, all right, well, maybe he'll, feud with Shinsuke Nakamura next for the U.S. title. Maybe they could do something with him and Andrade Cien Almas. And then all of a sudden, it's amazing how quickly things can change. Nia Jax punches Becky Lynch in the face and everything falls apart. And here we are now with Daniel Bryan as the WWE Champion. AJ's reign comes to an end. And we'll see what happens Sunday at Survivor Series. But that is the latest on that whole situation. I will say when Paul Heyman first came out at the beginning of Smackdown and name-dropped Daniel Bryan, for a brief fleeting moment there, I thought this was leading to Daniel Bryan as the new Paul Heyman guy. Otherwise, it just didn't make sense to me why Heyman would even mention his name. And that kind of intrigued me a little bit, although I don't know that would necessarily be a great fit. But then again, Bryan, or rather Heyman and Punk turned out to be a pretty interesting combo. Then again, Punk was a better talker than Bryan is. But we'll see what happens. I am intrigued. Their back was against the wall. They did what they felt they had to do. Was it a panic move? Of course it was, absolutely. But I like the idea of Daniel Bryan as a heel. And that mischievous look he had on his face at the end of the show tonight. And AJ chasing, it's something different. AJ was champion for a year. It was kind of, becoming repetitive. And I think there's something to be said now for him being back in the role of chasing for the championship. I think it helps make things a little bit more interesting. And now people can boo Bryan and his wife as much as they want to because now they're both heels. See? So it all works out in the end. Anyway, I will be back with episode 573 of the podcast. I'm sure there's going to be a lot more news that comes out over the course of the week. So there'll be plenty more to cover on the show this weekend. Survivor Series is this weekend. There'll be a review for the show up here late Sunday night, early Monday morning. A lot of content going to be going up, so hit that sub button if you haven't already done so. Hit the thumbs up, and I will see you back here on YouTube again for more content real soon. Take care, guys.